Hi there and welcome to the latest video from Russell's Football History, and as it's the FA Cup third round weekend this weekend, I thought it was the right time to do a video on what I feel is the decline of the FA Cup. Now this weekend, as you watch the games across Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday, you'll most likely hear the phrase, the magic of the FA Cup, especially if there's an upset in the air. And while this phrase still has some relevance, I feel what the magic of the FA Cup is not there anymore. It's been a gradual decline, and I feel that this video is important because you need to understand where the FA Cup once stood to understand why it has declined and why it probably will continue to decline. Now, a lot of the argument is around money and where money lays in the landscape of English and European football, and it certainly does not lay with the FA Cup. But let's go back. So the FA Cup came into being in 1872, and it's had some memorable moments across English football history. So we had the first final at Wembley in 1923. We had the 1953 Coronation Cup final with Stanley Matthews finally winning his FA Cup medal. We've had shock finals, Sunderland beating Leeds, for example, right up to Wigan in 2013, beating Manchester City while being relegated in the same season. Notable FA Cup achievements have been included in doubles, so Tottenham were the first team in the 20th century to do the double, followed by Arsenal, and then Manchester United, and then Manchester United took it further and did the treble in 1999. Classic finals, such as the Gerrard final in 2006, right up to Crystal Palace's brilliant win against Manchester City in 2025. The FA Cup is full of memorable moments. Hereford beating Newcastle in the 70s, one of the great shocks. But where the FA Cup now stands, it's fallen far. So the FA Cup, one of the reasons that it was such a draw was royalty. So whether the king or the queen of the time or prince or princess would usually present the cup to the winning captain. The fact that television was crucial in bringing the FA Cup to the nation's forefront, but also it's been its downfall. So in the 1960s, when ITV came onto the scene, both BBC and ITV would show the cup final. It was one of the very, very few live football events that was shown on TV. So where, as I said, we've got the FA Cup third round live matches over Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, the FA Cup final was one of few that was always shown live. And as the 70s and into the 80s, ITV and BBC tried to outdo each other. So coverage would start earlier and earlier, to the point where in the mid-1980s, there was even interviews with players in their beds, in their cup final hotels on the day of the cup final. I mean, it's unbelievable to think of that today, but that's what was happening. And they'd have comedians and special quiz shows, and it was literally geared. So even if you only had a passing interest in football, the FA Cup final was one of the moments for the season. And if you look at a lot of old documentaries, a lot of European players used to say one of the things that drew them, or one of their memories of English football, was the FA Cup final, because it was shown out, one of the few games that was shown outside of English shores. It got to the point where in 1970, the final replay between Chelsea and Leeds attracted over 25 million viewers and is one of the most watched events in British TV history. Now, a number of things led to the FA Cup's decline. And unfortunately, the first one was a tragedy. Hillsborough at the FA Cup semi-final in 1989, when 97 Liverpool fans died through bad policing and the way the fans were just treated like animals. Because of that, the Taylor report came out, and it recommended that all English football stadiums needed to be upgraded, made all-seater. And this required money. Now, at the same time, the top clubs in England, Manchester United, Tottenham, Arsenal, Liverpool and Everton, were discussing TV revenue. and breaking away from the Football League because they felt that they shouldn't be sharing TV revenue with all of the rest of the Football League clubs. And this led to eventually the Premier League in 1992. Now, while football live on TV was starting to grow in the 80s, so a few more league matches were shown, it was the Premier League setup in 1992 with Sky that really changed the game. Suddenly, Monday Night Football, Super Sunday. And as each TV deal was signed with the Premier League, more and more matches would be shown. So the FA Cup went from being the game to one of many. Now, it still had the prestige in the 90s. It hadn't quite lost it. But changes were also in European football. So the European Champions Club Cup changed the UEFA Champions League. And then in 1996, UEFA decided that you no longer had to be league champions to take part in the Champions League. So second place teams could take part, and eventually third and fourth. Now that happened quite quickly. So by 2003, for English football at the very least, you could qualify for the Champions League if you'd finished fourth. And as we have nowadays, it can even be fifth, depending on certain parameters. Now, with the expansion of the Champions League, the European Cup Winners' Cup was destroyed, ended in 1999. Now, the FA Cup used to win that, and if you hadn't won your league as well, then you'd go into the Cup Winners' Cup. And that was seen as Europe's second most prestigious competition, even though it generally had a weaker field than the UEFA Cup and obviously the European Champions Club Cup. And by allowing second place teams in and not giving a Champions League place to the FA Cup, it really signalled a change in English football, and this was exemplified by Manchester United. Because in 97-98, they were runners-up to Arsenal in the Premier League. Arsenal did the double that season. Now, 2 years before, Manchester United would have gone into the UEFA Cup. But because of the new expanded Champions League, they went into the Champions League qualifier. And the following season, 98-99, they ended up doing the treble. As part of the treble, they won the last ever FA Cup semi-final replay against Arsenal in an absolute classic. So for the beginning of the 99-2000 season, FIFA wanted to get into the club game, and they set up the Club World Cup. Not quite similar to the 2020-2025 version, but it was a start. And this was scheduled for January of 2000. And they invited Manchester United to play. Now, Manchester United were owned by Martin Edwards, English owner. So we didn't have the Glaziers yet. There weren't some foreign owner. It was an English owner who understood Manchester United. Martin Edwards' father had been chairman of Manchester United. Now, United were put under pressure by the English FA, who had launched the 2006 World Cup bid, to go and play in this tournament. Now, there obviously was some money on offer as well. Obviously, you don't go to FIFA tournaments or any football tournaments for charity, literally, of the major tournaments. So there obviously was some money on offer for compensation. So Manchester United, as holders of the FA Cup, decided to pull out of the 99-2000 FA Cup. It was a one-off, but a precedent had been set. As I say, it only came about because of the UEFA expansion, and the more that the Champions League expanded, the more the Europa League, the UEFA Cup that would become the Europa League expanded, the more impact it was going to have on the domestic game. And because the money on offer from the Champions League, suddenly winning the FA Cup and getting into the UEFA Cup or the Europa League was not as lucrative as finishing fourth in the Premier League. So there is the decline of the FA Cup, and that's continued right up till the present day, because as European football has expanded, the Champions League has got bigger and bigger, and the Premier League, it's very rare to find more than 2 or 3 matches on a Saturday at 3. Things have had to give. So replays. From the first round now, they are scrapped. And while this helps the bigger teams, because obviously they've got more European games to play, it does not help the lower league. You know, clubs used to survive on a money-spinning replay. If they could get a bigger team and then get to a replay, that could set them up for years. But that's been taken away. So, for example, Tamworth played Tottenham in the 2024-25 third round, and they got a draw. But instead of then going to play the replay at Tottenham, because of the scrapping of the replays, it went into extra time and Tottenham eventually made it through. But it's not just about the money. Those Tamworth players will never, most likely not have an opportunity to play at a Premier League ground at a proper game. But it's been denied to them. So while they obviously would have got income from the TV, because obviously it was a live game, that doesn't detract, that doesn't help with the fact that those Tamworth players have missed out playing, you know, at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Clubs would rather finish fourth and get into the Champions League than win an actual trophy in the FA Cup. And that's quite a sad state of affairs. If you, not so much the fans, but if you ask the club owners what would you rather win or do, if they had the choice, it would be get into the Champions League. Not, yes, of course, they'd like to win the league, but give me second, give me third, give me fourth. The FA Cup, and this again shows you the decline in importance, is you only have to look at Manchester United managers. Sir Alex Ferguson, the FA Cup saved him in 1990. You know, no one ever is 100% sure of how close he would have come if he hadn't won the cup, but it was close. And he won the FA Cup in 1990. That led to winning the Cup Winners' Cup the following season, then the League Cup, and then the league, the first Premier League. But while he's winning the FA Cup, he's not exactly setting the league on fire until really 91-92 when they finished runners-up to Leeds. So the FA Cup wasn't instant success, but it bought him time to then do what he then do and then become one of the most successful manager in British history. But fast forward to Louis van Gaal at United, 2016, they win the FA Cup. He's sacked pretty much during the game. People know he's going to be sacked before he knows it, and yet he wins the FA Cup. Ten Hag wins the FA Cup. He lasts another, 3-4 months, and then he's sacked. Why? Because of the Champions League. If you're not getting into the Champions League and getting the money, the FA Cup ain't going to save you anymore. And that's quite depressing. Another element of the decline in the FA Cup is you only have to look at teams who used to win the FA Cup and now who wins it. So I had a little look. And in the last 30 years, 1992 to 2025, there's only been 10 teams who have won the Cup. So you've had Arsenal won it 9 times in this period, Chelsea 7 times, United 6 times, City 3 times and Liverpool 3 times. And then you've had individual wins for Everton, Wigan, Portsmouth, Leicester and Palace. So you could say, but Christian, there's still shocks. You know, we are talking just the final here, but there's still shocks. It was a shock when Wigan won it and got relegated in 2013. It was a shock when Palace won it and Portsmouth. But Arsenal, Chelsea, United, City and Liverpool are your Champions League regular qualifiers. Yes, Man City and Chelsea have had massive investment in this period of the, since 92, but the FA Cup is reflecting that Champions League dominance. The teams who have spent most of the time in the Champions League are the teams winning the FA Cup. But if you look at the 30 years before that, 1960 to 1992, 16 teams won it. So Tottenham won it 6 times, Liverpool, Manchester United 5 times each, but West Ham 3 times. In the 60s, in the 70s, and in 1980 they became the last second division championship team to win it. Arsenal and Everton won it twice, and then you had a number of clubs who won it once. Strange for modern eyes, but Chelsea and Man City You know, they didn't win a lot of trophies then. They won it once each. Leeds, although they dominated English football for a number of years, only won it once. Then you had your surprise packages: Coventry, Wimbledon, Sunderland, Southampton, West Brom, Wolves, Ipswich. But we see here Tottenham. They won the league once in this period as part of the double of 61, but they won the cup 5 more times. Liverpool, while they won it 5 times in this period, when they were most dominating English and European football under Bob Paisley, they never won it. The closest they got was losing the final in 1977. So what you can see there is teams who are winning the league, like where's Derby's name? Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa. They all won leagues at this point. As I said, Leeds, who struggled, you know, they won 1 cup. The FA Cup was seen as one of the hardest things to win. If you even go back further, more clubs win it. There was more variety. So there is less chance for teams to win the FA Cup now. It ends up in the same amount of hands. I mean, Chelsea won it on multiple occasions in the 90s and especially 2000s. Finals are becoming a little bit repetitive. But it's not the end of the day. I mean, the quick fix to me would be give a Champions League place to the FA Cup winners. Simple as. Now, the reason they don't do that is the reason the Champions League has expanded. Because if you give a Champions League place to the FA Cup winners, teams like Tottenham, Manchester United, Chelsea, Villa, Forest last season, they have a better chance of getting in the Champions League by finishing 4th than they do by winning the FA Cup. Because in the FA Cup, lose 1 game and you're out. 1 bad day, 1 bad decision, and your FA Cup run is done. Whereas in the league, you could lose 6, 7, 8 games and still finish 4th. That's why you will not see a Champions League place given to the FA Cup. Now, there is a bit of a wider European significance here in the fact that while the FA Cup had held great priority in England, cup competitions in other places are were never held that high. So there is still some magic left in the FA Cup, you know, when a lower league team does draw a Premier League team. But for a lot of teams, Premier League and Championship, they follow the money now. And, you know, I'm talking about the owners. So if you're in the top half of the Premier League, your eyes are fixed on, can we get in the top 4? If you're in the bottom half of the Premier League, your eyes are fixed on, don't go down, because the amount of money you lose. If you're in the top half of the Championship, or probably as low as 14th or 15th, your eyes are fixed on trying to get in the playoffs or the top 2 to get up into the Premier League. And if you're in the bottom part of the Championship, your obviously aim is to say, well, let's just make sure we don't go down because next season we might be able to get the playoffs. I mean, the team I follow have been up and down in terms of playoffs 1 year, almost relegated the following year. So FA Cup is not a priority. It will not save your job anymore. It's great, you know, Palace win it, brilliant. But if Manchester United, whoever their next manager will be, if they win it, if they win the FA Cup at the end of the season but don't qualify for the Champions League, it's not exactly a job saver this year. If Liam Rossini just come in at Chelsea, if Chelsea win the FA Cup but finish 6th, will that save his job? 6 months in? Probably not. So Champions League qualification. So that's where I feel, as I say, when they talk about the magic of the FA Cup, that it's so small to what it used to be. But with all of my videos, you know, as I've said before, football is about debate and we're never all going to agree. So when you watch this and listen to this, you might think, yeah, you're right on that, Christian, but no, I don't agree with you on that. And that's absolutely fine. The aim of these videos is just to give you a bit of context and a bit of history to where we are today. And so when they push out the narrative or the magic of the cup, you can think, well, actually, it's not the same. Now, we all have our different generations. People will say that football was so much better in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. I'm not like that. I'm not saying that football's terrible today and it was so much better, because there's always a middle ground. You know, watch that Chelsea Leeds Cup final replay. In the Premier League this week, we've had sendings off for pulling hair, talking back to the ref and sarcastically clapping, and then incident in the Liverpool-Arsenal game with Martinelli and Conor Bradley. Contrast and compare that with the cup final replay of Chelsea Leeds, and that is literally punches and kicks and everything. Now, I don't want either of the two. I want a middle ground. What that middle ground is, obviously, it would need a bit more discussion. But as I say, the point of these videos is to watch them and do your own research, do your own thinking. Forget the narrative that TNT Sports and Sky Sports and BBC try and push out. Oh, the magic is still in the FA Cup, it's still there. Make up your own mind, use your own eyes. Whoever you support, ask yourself this question. If my owners were given a choice of finishing 4th in the Premier League or winning the FA Cup, what would they choose? And I think we all know the answer. And it ain't a trophy. So I'll leave it there. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe below. We'll be doing a few more videos over the next few weeks, especially on the UEFA Champions League. That's coming up, so that's going to be a big one. But just to say thank you for watching. And as I say, do your own research, whether you agree with me or not. As I say, just to provide some context and some history behind where we are today in football, so we can just understand it a bit better. Thank you for watching.